Welcome to Conversations. I'm Muqtedar, your host, and today I'm going to talk about the weakening of the global order, an order that was created and sustained by the United States for nearly 75 plus years. And as a result of the weakening of this order, we see the resurgence of irredentism. What that really means is, I will explain what irredentism really means, is expansion of territory by taking parts of entire other states into your country. Uh, and I will talk about essentially three cases, Russia, China, and India, as I see all three of them as major challenges to the existing global order who are seeking change. And I will also talk about the role that the United States has played in this going forward. But before I start discussing these things, if you have not already subscribed to Conversations, do subscribe to Conversations, like this video, press the bell icon for sure so that you get notifications when I post videos. And also don't forget to share this with your socio-political network. So first, let's start with what is irredentism. It is a concept which says it's talking about states which seek uh, the territory of another state. So, for example, Iraq's claim for Kuwait was an example of irredentism. Iraq said that we have historical reasons to why Kuwait belongs to Iraq, and we are the same ethnicity. There's hardly any difference, and so Kuwait does not deserve to exist as an independent state. So when claims are made, which are usually based on ethnicity or history, at least in international relations and international law, there is an acknowledgement that irredented states can make claims. Doesn't mean that those claims will be granted to them based on either ethnicity or based on history. So we have a shared history, even though we may not have a shared identity. So in that sense, there are many states in the world today which continue to, especially because of the post-colonial legacy, which sometimes has arbitrarily divided and created states. Many states have claims to others. The concept of Akhand Bharat, which claims a much larger India than what it is in its current borders at the moment. A claim that not only Myanmar, Bangladesh, but also Pakistan and Afghanistan and perhaps Sri Lanka also belong to the greater India. So this is not based on ethnicity or shared religion, but this is based on history. So India's claim to Akhand Bharat is irredentism based on history, whereas there might be those who claim, such as Russia's claim to territories where Russians live, such as eastern Ukraine, is based on shared ethnicity, since these are Russians. And so there are many such places in the world which can become targets of irredentism. For example, the southern part of Bulgaria is mostly Turkish. And so the Bulgarians live under this constant fear that one day the Turks could do what Putin is doing currently, incite the Turks in Bulgaria to rise in rebellion, and then Turkey can come in and intervene and then annex those regions, claiming that they are Turkish anyway. So these are some examples of irredentism. But the current international order or world order, which is more or less created by America and American ideas through the United Nations and the various multilateral institutions that the United States helped create in order to govern the world. So these institutions of global governance, such as the World Bank, the IMF, and particularly the United Nations and its UN Security Council. So there are two principles that underpin, there are many principles, but two critical principles of the UN Charter are sovereignty of states, and the other is the right of people for self-determination. India, fortunately, I think Nehru showed some vision there. And so when India joined the United Nations, it did object to the right of self-determination in that case, arguing that the Kashmiris did not have the right to self-determination, while others do. So people who are under colonial occupation, according to the United Nations principle of self-determination, do have a right to a homeland. So the Palestinians can legally claim for a nation state to fulfill their aspirations to be free and independent. And the other is this principle of sovereignty, which for weak states which emerged through decolonization, this was a very important principle. Otherwise, they would be attacked and swallowed by their powerful neighbors. So the principle of sovereignty is something that especially third world nations, underdeveloped nations, weak nations, really adhere to, because the rule of law, the international law that gave exclusive authority to states over their designated territory or internationally recognized borders, was their only safe way. Even today, many states in Africa cannot properly, forget about Africa, even the United States is unable to defend its sovereignty along its southern border. So even the most powerful country cannot protect its borders. So how can you expect any other country to do so? So what really protected these countries was the concept of sovereignty. So what happens now is that the principle of sovereignty then clashes with this irredentist instinct of states. So if India claims that Bangladesh does not have a right to exist because it was originally part of India, and so Bangladesh should be annexed and integrated into India, what India, such a claim by India would be doing is violating the sovereignty of the state of Bangladesh. So Bangladesh now, by existing as a state, as a member of the United Nations organization, and has recognized boundaries and has sovereignty over it. So irredentism would be violating their sovereignty. However, if there are some groups who want independence, I don't know who are the ethnic groups inside Bangladesh that may want to become independent of Bangladesh, just as Bangladesh became independent of East-West Pakistan. They were acting on the principle of self-determination. So the Bengalis of East Pakistan were able to realize their right to self-determination and have a nation for themselves. So that's a good example. So right now, we see that the global order is weakening primarily because the decline of US hegemony and decline of US power. So the fact that the United States is not as relatively powerful over the rest of the world as it used to be when it started creating these institutions of global governance, that institution has become weak. So think of it like that. If the government gets weak and the law and order is not being enforced properly, then of course there will be fragmentation. So what we are seeing in the world is an instinct to fragmentation. And you see more and more countries are trying to break the world order and expand territorially. One of the principles we thought in the 20th century was, with the creation of the United Nations and acceptance of the concepts of nation states, there will be no expansion of boundaries. Before that, countries could annex on other countries and empires were created, and it was okay. But now it is not okay to conquer another country and expand its territory. That freedom is allowed only to Israel. Thanks to the United States, Israel had annexed Golan Heights and the United States recognized it. It is against international law for sure, but because the United States is the cop, some favorites of the cop can continue to break the law without having to pay any penalties or be brought up for accountability. But nevertheless, as the United States is becoming weaker, more and more competing powers are seeking to practice these claims that they have historically to territories which are in other countries. And I'm going to talk about 3 today. But you must understand the reason why I pick these 3 countries and not say the case of Morocco and Western Sahara or other smaller cases, is because these 3 countries are very special. Russia, China, and India are all civilizational states. They all claim to be civilizations. So by virtue of civilization, they have claim to much larger territories, to huge empires that existed in the past. And they are also challenges to the United States hegemony and domination in the world. While India seeks changes in the global structure, India's call for reform of UN Security Council is nothing short of reforming the global order. So India does want a change in the global order, but the way India is trying to do is work at the moment inside the system with occasionally crossing the line very little. So India is staying between the lines, but occasionally it stays a little bit this side or that side of the rules and principles that the United States has articulated for the rest of the world. So more or less, India is playing the game to bring about change from within. But China is trying to change the global order. At least that is a perception in the West. I don't understand why China would want to do that, because China has been the biggest beneficiary in the recent decades, in the last 3 decades, of the existing global order. The biggest winner coming out of globalization is China. So why would it want to change that order? I don't understand. What it seeks is greater power and greater say in the governance of the same system. And it also, like Israel, gets a special treatment where it can continue to break the law every day and not be held accountable. China would like to be Israel once in a while. It would like to break its own, the international norms, and get away with it occasionally. That's what China wants. And that's my perception. But who knows? China may want an entirely new global order, but I have not seen an articulation of that vision from China. We have seen that from critiques of China in the West. So the first case is that of Russia, and you can see Russia. I think it was Zbigniew Brzezinski, the former national security advisor of the United States, who made this comment that without Ukraine, Russia is not an empire. It just becomes a nation state. So in order for Russia to remain an empire, it needs Ukraine. And so Putin, in his vision of restoring the greater Russia, the Akhand Russia, if you may like, the great Russian Empire, wants to bring in countries with large Russian populations much more into the fold of Russia. So you can see his aggression in Georgia, and he also seeks to ensure that these countries, which he feels are potentially part of the Russian Empire, do not get swallowed by Western alliance, especially the NATO. And the expansion of NATO in areas where there are large Russian populations has freaked him out. So anyway, in 2002, as you can see on this map, he attacked. And in this map that you see, most of the red areas of Ukraine are ones which have large Russian populations, and these are what, at the minimum, that Russia hopes to accomplish. So if the war were to stop soon, I think this is what Russia will keep. It has already annexed some of these parts, Crimea, I think some of the region in Donetsk and Luhansk, they're all been annexed already into Russia. And so this is what the war is for. Theoretically, best case scenario, Russia would like to take all of Ukraine, but at the moment, it is unable to do so. If you look at this map, it is as of May 14th. I'm recording this show on May 16th, so this is about 48 hours old. And so you can see from the various color coding the areas. So yellow is the areas that Russia had actually conquered initially in 2022, but were all taken back by Ukraine in its counter offensives. And then if you see all the red parts, these are the parts that Russia has been able to advance and capture in this current offensive since 2022. And the pink ones that you see are parts that already existed and that Russia probably acquired in 2014. So this is where so what Russia is trying to say is claiming that these are Russian territories, they belong properly. So if you listen to one of the long historical lectures that Putin gives, he has all these religious and historical claims to Ukraine and feels that Ukraine, I mean, he said about Ukraine what Saddam Hussein said about Iraq, that it doesn't have the right to exist as an independent nation state. If you look at China, I mean, China has lots of border disputes with Philippines, with Vietnam, with India, and all over the place. But I just want to talk about Taiwan because this is what is in the news so much. And if you look at Taiwan, China claims it's a very interesting thing. Until 1960s, Taiwan claimed that it was China and the rest of it all belonged to Taiwan. And China claimed, PRC, that is People's Republic of China, that is Republic of China, that Taiwan is ROC. So PRC claimed that all of it was China, and ROC also claimed all of it was China. But then after Nixon's visit to China, the big one, the big China became China, and the small China became Taiwan. So China has basically historical claims. The island was always part of China, should be part of China. It's just a province that is sort of rebelling. And has succeeded in some ways, for example, with Hong Kong, getting Hong Kong back from Great Britain. But China has not been able to realize its goal so far of fully annexing Taiwan. Taiwan has become a very rich, independent, technologically advanced, and highly sophisticated democracy. And so the Taiwanese would not want to go and live in an authoritarian state like China, which is also economically weaker state. And they are seeing what has happened in Hong Kong. And so becoming part of the Greater China, I'm sure, does not really appeal to many Taiwanese. But China is biding its time. Some people feel that China is going to invade as early as 2025. But I think the moment when we are all very sure that the United States is become so weak that it cannot really enforce international norms and global order. I mean, come on, the US lost to the Taliban. I mean, it could not achieve its political goals. In Afghanistan, after 20 years of war, it failed in Iraq. The US has not won a war and the political goals that motivated the war in a long time. So even though at the moment the US does seem committed to Taiwan, and they have just the US Congress just voted $10 billion to help Taiwan, I'm not very sure to what extent the US is prepared to fight for Taiwanese independence in all-out war with China. And I'm sure China is also not sure, and that's why China has not invaded Taiwan. But most analysts feel that China is going to test that sooner than later. I feel that a war would completely destroy Taiwan unnecessarily, and also perhaps China, if the West really attacks China in a hard way. It will definitely hurt China economically, because that would be complete delinking of Chinese economy from Western economy, where it really still depends for exports. So I don't think in the long run this is beneficial to China. What might be far more interesting is that hopefully the next leader who comes up and becomes the leader of China completely reverses policies to Taiwan, integrate Taiwan into Chinese economy. Taiwan was heavily invested into China. Taiwanese economy would not have survived, and I don't think it can still survive without all the investments that it makes in mainland China. So I think a better strategy for China would have been to integrate Taiwan through economic partnerships rather than to threaten it. So anyway, it remains to be seen, but this is another example of irredentism which might be realized or be attempted to if the global order becomes weaker. And the way the United States is going, I mean, the US economy is doing well. The US is still militarily has huge advantage over most powers. But it has also become very apparent that we live in a world where military cannot deliver political outcomes. And you can see that with Israel. Hamas was violent and brutal for a few hours on one day. And in retaliation, Israel has been brutal many times over for the last 7 months, more than 200 days. And yet it has not achieved its political goals. So military power has its limits. And so one could argue that the battle will become more geo-economic or more of an economic battle to contain China and protect Taiwan. So we will see what happens in this arena. But I do feel that if Xi Jinping continues and in his lifetime as leader of China, if there is an opportunity, China could take it. China also features in the third case that I want to talk about, which is India. So if you look at India, India has two issues with this. One is the bigger Akhand Bharat, which includes, like I said, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Myanmar, and Bangladesh. And going back to the old historical imaginary of the past, some maps from the Maurya Empire or the Mughal Empire, whatever historical justifications are there for the Akhand Bharat. But if you look at just for Kashmir side of it, the immediate goal, at least in this elections, the Bharatiya Janata Party leaders are talking about getting the way they talk is that they seem to be threatening that if you get elected, we will take back POK, and then one of them will say, "Oh, we don't mean that we are going to attack." So I don't know what they're trying to say. Some people explain it by saying, "Oh, they're thinking of the 1971 model." Well, the 1971 model made Bangladesh independent. So if you apply the 1971 model for POK, then there will be an independent Kashmir country and not joining India. Bangladesh did not join India. It became an independent country. So whatever incoherent things and statements are coming from the BJP party, if you look at the map, the parts of India that India claims are actually not just Pak-occupied Kashmir. There is also a China-occupied Ladakh region, the Aksai Chin. So there are three parts to this, or rather 4 parts to Kashmir. The yellow part is the one that is under India's control at the moment, Jammu and Kashmir, and it has Jammu, Kashmir, and Ladakh. It's all part of the yellow. And then you have the green part. The green part is about 70 to 80,000 square kilometers, and that's occupied by Pakistan. And theoretically, it was never actually under India's sovereignty. By India, I mean the India post 1947. Kashmir was an independent kingdom, and it acceded into India, but by that time, Pakistan had already occupied all the parts that you see are green. China claims and has control on Aksai Chain, which is about 38,000 square kilometers. And then there is this part where you can see, which is about 5,000 some hundred square kilometers, which Pakistan gave to China. The territory ceded by Pakistan to China. And this part is very critical for China because it connects Xinjiang province with Tibet. And so for China, this has tremendous strategic value. Indians never talk about taking Aksai Chin back, but there is a lot of talk about taking Kashmir back. There is hope that Pakistan will dismantle or fragment and break into 4 parts. And so the Kashmiris then will willingly become happy to join India. They may want to become an independent country. Who knows? But the hopes in India are that Pakistan will break into 4 parts, which is quite likely given the bad governance they have and all the insurgencies in Balochistan. Every province other than Punjab is unhappy in Pakistan. There is no doubt about that. KPK is unhappy, the Sindhis are unhappy, so are the Balochistanis. So if Pakistan does break into 4 parts, so what happens to POK remains to be seen. It is perhaps at that moment, in that chaos, India could militarily take an advantage of trying to bring order and occupy POK. But all of this is possible only if the global order as it exists today dismantles. Those people who think the United States will look favorably to India invading Kashmir and occupying it, POK, I think are misguided, because then the US argument against Taiwan, US argument against Ukraine, the Russian invasion in Ukraine, and Chinese potential invasion of Taiwan all become very weak. And so even though the United States is used to living in a hypocritical fashion, it will also appear very weak to its allies, especially in Europe and other parts of the world. So I think that these 3 countries, which are all seeking to revise the global order, are all waiting for the United States to become much, much more weaker, and then they will seek to act. And that remains to be seen. It is quite possible that in the next 20 years, we can see the United States become weaker. There's so much political domestic chaos in the US, it's unbelievable how unruly American politicians are, and they keep getting elected. So we will see. But as far as I'm concerned, I think the only country which is going to come out successful in the short run is Russia, because it is already active. It's paying a heavy price. But if there is peace by this year, I have a feeling that it might end up keeping at least the red parts that I showed you in the first map. But otherwise, I am not very sure that in the near future, China will be able to successfully invade Taiwan. It could trigger a war, which is not in its interest. With each passing day, the power gap between the US and China is reducing if the global order remains as it is. The West is also changing the global order with new sanctions, deglobalization, de-risking, offshore, friendshoring, with all these policies towards a new kind of ordering of the global economy, which is then going to hurt China. So that then the gap between the West and China will not reduce, but might actually increase if all these sanctions begin to hurt Chinese economy. So the power gap will remain. And I don't think at the moment China is strong enough to take on the US and its allies, which will be NATO plus Japan, Australia, maybe even Philippines and India. So I didn't see China launching a successful campaign. And I don't think India also launching a successful military campaign in Kashmir. What I do see is a lot of chatter for a vote gathering, and beyond that, nothing much. And in the possible future, if there is a likelihood that Pakistan would dismantle, I think there's more likelihood that POK may choose to become an independent state like Bangladesh, rather than happily become part of India. Lately, Bangladesh economy is doing much better than India's. Bangladeshi per capita is also much better than India's. So if POK looks to Bangladesh, history will tell it to become independent, not join. As far as India is concerned, it is more of a pride thing more than an economic or strategic advantage. Of course, most of the water comes from there. So I don't know. We shall see what happens. It all hinges on how weak the US becomes and how close Pakistan comes to becoming a nation that is about to fragment. So I hope you found this discussion interesting and makes you think. So please subscribe to Khanversations, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share it with your friends and your networks. Until next time, I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. Take care.